Welcome back. This is Patrick, the attorney. We're going to be looking at the defense opening statement for the Alec Murdaugh trial.
For the defense.
Please report, Your Honor.
Yes, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my name is Dick Harpootlian. I think I introduced myself to you all and the attorneys, the three other attorneys, Jim Griffin, Philip Barber, Margaret Fox. It is our honor to represent Alec Murdaugh, or Murdaugh, depending on how you pronounce it. I say it's our honor because I submit to you what you have heard from the Attorney General as facts are not. They're his theories, his conjecture. Now stand up. This is Alec Murdaugh. And Alec was the loving father of Paul and the loving husband of Maggie. You're not going to hear a single witness say.
Some attorneys might classify this type of opening as a clopening, C-L-O-P-E-N-I-N-G, because he's weaving some pretty good arguments into the description of what he thinks the evidence is going to show. There's a distinct separation. And I'm just going to refer to the criminal defense lawyer as Dick by his first name. When he has Alec Murdaugh stand up, he's humanizing his client. He wants the people to see him as a person, not as a thing that did something. And that's a common tactic in criminal defense world. And he does a really, really good clopening on this set of facts.
That their relationship, Maggie and Alex's relationship, were anything other than loving. You're going to hear about how they went to a baseball game the weekend before. You're going to hear about their relationship. You're going to see texts and emails indicating a loving relationship. Paul, the apple of his...
When he starts talking about texts and emails and the loving relationship, what I think he's going to be alluding to is that there's no motive for this killing. As he gets deeper into the opening statement, he'll call it a slaughter or massacre. And what I think he's trying to do is he's trying to put some distance between a loving father and somebody that would have killed these people in cold blood.
You're going to see a video somewhere between 7:30 and 8 o'clock the night of the murders with Paul and Alec riding around looking at some trees they planted. It's a Snapchat that Paul sent to other people because the trees were not planted very well. They were cantilevering over. They're laughing. They're having a good time. That would be about an hour before the Attorney General says he swatted them. When I say he swatted them, when they were swatted, and no question, Paul Murdaugh was shot twice with buckshot, 12-gauge buckshot, once in the chest. And by the way, that shot would indicate it was in the chest and came out under his arm.
When he's talking about the shotgun and no defensive wounds and the fact that the prosecutor is speculating, when you're thinking of a trial, it's actually not about the facts. It's about what conclusions can a person derive from the facts. Because you could have two sets of facts or one set of facts, and you're going to have two people sitting next to each other. They're going to hear the exact same thing, and they're going to have two different conclusions. when he's going through the fact that he's a loving father, they're having a great moment. They drove around the property for 45 minutes to an hour looking at the, I think, sunflower seeds that didn't get seeded or didn't come in after they were seeded, and how the father and son were having a great time. And then he uses the word slaughter. He's putting distance. He's saying, okay, well, this man could not have done this to his loving family. And then he points out some controversy, says, hey, the prosecutor is speculating when he's saying that there's no defensive wound. The prosecutor is speculating because no defensive wound is not a fact. It is a conclusion from the autopsy. Again, his conclusion and his expert is going to be fact. It is a conclusion from the autopsy. Again, his conclusion and his expert is going to be saying there were defensive wounds. His hand was up, and that the shotgun wad, that's the white piece of paper that's in the shell casing, got lodged underneath the muscle there.
Somebody that might have been holding up their hands. So when he says no defensive wounds, he perhaps was being held at shotgun. I mean, I can make the same sort of speculation that the Attorney General can, because that's all he's doing is speculating. What we do know is 12 gauge, fairly close range shot to the chest. He must have been turned because it comes out under his arm. There's wadding, if you're familiar with a shotgun, under his arm. The second shot ended up, and there's going to be some question about the direction of that shot, but ended up entering his skull cavity, and the gases from that shot literally exploded his head like a watermelon hit with a sledgehammer. All that was left was the front of his face. Everything else was gone. His brain exploded out of his head, hit the ceiling in the shed, and dropped to his feet. Horrendous, horrible, butchering.
He's laying some good groundwork for some good arguments here. When he's talking about the gases in the gun, there's going to be a lot of talk about gunshot residue. When you start looking at gunshot residue, they're going to start talking about proximity, particles. They're going to be, and I think in this case, they'll be talking something about primer gunshot residue, which is the three elements, I think, lead, barium, and antimony, if I'm correct, in the primer. So the primer's the little, we'll call it a little cap that explodes before the gunpowder in the casing explodes and expels the projectile, the bullet, or the shot shell. There's going to be a lot of talk about gunshot residue. There's also going to be a lot of talk about gunshot residue transfer. Again, I'm speculating just from my own experience of what I've seen in the courtroom. But gunshot residue transfer, when you look at the interview that Alec gave to the police on scene, he does say, yes, I touched them, I moved them. When they're talking about the gunshot being within 3 feet of their head, of Paul's head when he was killed, and how the brains were blown up to the ceiling of the shed and then came back down, there's going to be arguments saying, well, you know what, Mr. Policeman, you didn't see any blood on the top of Alex's head. You didn't see any on his shoulders, on his neck. How could blood have spattered if he was a person killing him at 3 feet and none of that residue of brain or blood fall on his head? Also, you're going to have argument on the gunshot saying, okay, if this person, if Alec allegedly shot him with the shot shells, at least 2 blasts and several blasts with a 300 AR type rifle, and I'm going to say that's a rifle cartridge, there's a lot of gunpowder being expelled out of the end of that barrel. There's going to be a lot of talk about that when you get deeper into the case.
So to find Alec Murdaugh guilty of murdering his son, you're going to have to accept that within an hour of having a extraordinarily bonding, you can see it in the Snapchat, that he executes him in a brutal fashion. Not believable. Not believable. Now, Maggie is shot running. There's no defensive wounds because she's shot running, and after she falls to the ground and had one bullet that has hit her and probably traveled up and hit her brain, she's on the ground, and whoever the perpetrator was walked up, took that AR, and put one in the back of her head. Executed. Executed. Why? This is going to be interesting because we don't know why. He doesn't know why.
He brings up the fact, he says, why? He's talking about the savagery of the shooting here. Shoots Maggie while she's running, walks up to the back of her head and executes her, shoots Paul and blows his brains out. Why? He's asking why. He's trying to tie the motive not to his client because so far in all the media attention we've seen leading up to this case starting, the prosecution has not laid out a clear definition of any motive. They try to say, oh, because of his financial crimes. And remember, Alec Murdaugh's being charged with basically taking other people's money without their consent. But why? And I think part of the theme in this trial, and again, I'm speculating, but if I'm the defense attorney, you have, we'll call it the S.O.D.I defense, S.O.D.D.I. Some other dude did it. And Paul, remember, was driving that boat that killed a young lady who was in the boat. There's a lot of people that would want revenge on Paul for driving the boat and killing that girl, especially when you look at the facts of that case. So there's a lot of other reasons of who could have done it, why they would have wanted to do it. And then there's going to be a lot of facts saying, look, you don't have enough evidence to really prove that that Alec Murdaugh was the trigger man. It is, I'm thinking, going to be I'll call it a theory of the prosecution that the alleged cousin Eddie, who shot Alec on the side of the road so that Alec could have his son Buster collect $10 million in life insurance, which would not have been subject to the courts going after the money for any of Alec's wrongdoing, that Eddie might have been involved. We'll see, but I'm guessing that there might be some ties. I think Eddie is going to testify, and it's going to be interesting on what comes out. But the state feels they have a very strong case, even though it's circumstantial.
Theories of this and theories of that, but why? Number one. Number two, what was it in that hour between when he's yucking it up with Paul? And let me say this to you. His record, he was interviewed, he comes home and finds, there's no question about this, they've got telemetry from his car. He left the house at 9:06, returns at 10:01 after seeing his mother who has dementia. Now remember, that day, his father, who is dying, is taken to the hospital. Mom's home alone with the housekeeper. Perfectly reasonable for him to want to go see her. And later than usual, because his father's not there. He's in the hospital. He dies 2 days later. His father dies 2 days later. So the question is, if he leaves at 9:06 and he's back at 10:01, he literally,
So we got 9:06, 10:01 is going to be a key time frame. He leaves at 9:06 to go to his mother, who's down the road. The reason he went down the road is because his dad was just put in a nursing home. His mom was home alone with the caretaker. At 9:06, the prosecution's able to tie that his cell phone connected with his car and that he drove and that he arrived back at 10:01. Let's talk a little bit about cell phone data. Cell phone data, this is where it's going to get interesting. cell phone data. If this is the cell phone person standing with their cell phone and here's 3 towers, you would arguably say that this phone is closest to this tower, right? However, the cell towers do not automatically pick up the closest tower. The cell phone will pick up the tower with the best signal. What if there's a big mountain in between the cell phone and that tower? Well, guess what? It's going to look for this, or it's going to look for this. What if this is 25 miles away, and this is 10 miles away, and this is 5 miles away? Are you going to be able to say, oh, because the cell phone picked up this tower, that this person was over in this vicinity? That's going to be a big argument that you're going to see in this case. So again, cell phones pick up best reception, not closest reception. There's going to be a lot of data. And remember, cell phone data was not made for the courtroom. It was made for the phone companies to use and how to better service their customer base.
And he can account, the cars and the cell phone records account for where he was between 9:06 and 10:01. Now, the cell phone records, and you're going to hear this from their own experts, are incomplete. They're incomplete. And we submit one of the reasons they're incomplete. And by the way, how do they find Maggie's phone? Maggie's phone was thrown out on the side of the road about a quarter of a mile away from, a little bit more, maybe a half a mile, from the Moselle property, thrown out on the side of the road. They found it by using Find My iPhone. And the way they did that, they had to open it or have access. Who gave them the code to open the phone? Now, Murdaugh. And it's not destroyed, it's just thrown on the side of the phone. What you're also going to see is that Alec Murdaugh was calling that phone at 9:06. As he leaves the house, he did call her twice and texted her. And we also know that at 9:06, as he cranks his car, as the cell phone records show that, as the telemetry data shows the cell phone linking up with the car, that phone is being thrown on the side of the road almost a half a mile away. Now that is Houdini. That is magic. That is inexplicable. Now, I was making notes while the Attorney General was talking. But let me tell you what is more believable. The night he comes home and finds his wife and son butchered. And when I say butchered, you're going to see these photographs. When I see them now, after having seen them for the last 4 or 5 months, it still shocks me. It still is tough to look at. It still bothers me. And he comes home and finds his son laying in his own blood with his brain laying at his feet, shot to hell. He walks over, he checks to see if there's any life there, although, he's seeing his brain laying outside his body. He knows there's nothing there. He goes over and tries to get a pulse out of Maggie. No pulse there. Calls 911. I want you to hear that 911 tape. It is a man hysterical, in grief, trying to figure out what's going on. And he tells the 911 operator.
And this is going to be real interesting. When Alec Murdaugh gives a statement to the police, at least in my line of work, what I've seen is when people tend to lie, there's a split hesitation, millimeter of a second, half a second, and there's a pause between the question and the answer. When you listen to the interview by the police officer right there on the scene in the car, you're going to hear that Alec's response to the questions are instantaneously. He's not thinking. They ask him a question, bam, bam, bam. It's spitfire. He's rocket fire. Whatever they're asking, he's spitfire. Now, let's say you have two people in court and they're fighting over a child for custody. That judge in the black robe has to make a decision who's the liar. And a lot of times it's intuition and what do you feel. So when you hear that being played in the courtroom, if I'm Dick Harpootlian here, I'm going to be arguing that a person who answers without thinking is an innocent person. And again, no motive, no strong gunshot residue. And again, I'm speculating here because I don't have the answers on that. But that's my argument. No strong evidence on gunshot residue. No motive, lack of amount of gunshot residue. You're going to talk about transfer of gunshot residue. Alec admitted that he was touching the bodies before the police got there. If there's that much damage to the body from the gunshot, then there's going to be gunshot residue on the body. If he's touching that, he's going to have it on there, on his hands, on his arms. And if they have, well, this is going to be an argument. How long does gunshot residue last? And again, you're going to have regular gunshot residue, and then you're going to have primer gunshot residue. My argument is that if there's no primer gunshot residue, which is the residue of the three elements, I think it was, antimony was one of them. If there's not enough three of the primer residue gunshot coming out, being traced, then I think the defense has a really strong argument. And this is just from a case I learned on a case I had involving gunshot residue. It's been a while, but I have to go back through my file notes to read up on that. But think of a bullseye. And if you're thinking of a bullseye with gunshot residue, the closer in proximity, you're going to have a higher density. Now, let's say this is where a person was shot and this is 10 feet away. Could gunshot residue be here? And if the alleged shooter's within 3 feet of the person he's shooting, you would expect there's going to be a high concentration of gunshot residue. If Alec has the amount of gunshot residue on his hand, and again, when I was listening to some of the talking heads on the TV here, you're talking in parts per million, I believe, which is going to be minuscule. You would expect somebody would have a high number of parts per million. And you're going to have a lot of testimony on that from experts.
That he concerned, and he drives back up to the house. And by the way, you can't see, I've been out there, you can't see the shed where you might see the top of the shed. There are pine trees between the front porch or the porch on the house and the dog pens. And it's not a third of a mile, maybe by the way the crow flies, but it takes a little bit longer to drive down there. And this is not unusual for them to communicate by cell phone or text, even when they're all on the same property. It's 1,100 acres. Big property. They hunted it. So what I'm trying to say to you is that the Attorney General has given you his view. And again, you can't see the shed. And I'm going to ask the judge at some point during this trial to ask you, the jury, to be able to go to the scene so you can see it. You can understand the proportions. You can understand the details. Because the facts are what matter here. The facts. Let me give you another fact. You're going to hear their witnesses explain the catastrophic injuries to Paul. That his head literally exploded. And whoever shot him with that shotgun was probably no more than 3 feet away. Maybe closer, maybe a little further away. His head exploded. You would be covered in blood from head to foot. Head to foot. In blood. They seized his clothes that night. S.O.D.I did. And they well, first of all, you're going to see in the videos from the officers that arrived that night, there's no blood on him. They didn't find any blood on him. S.W.E.D.'s testing indicated 12 different places on his shirt and pants. No human blood detected. Period. Okay? You'll see pictures. A white t-shirt, no blood on it. Those are facts. Those aren't theories. Those are facts. Another fact that is, I think, the reason we're here today.